All right, everybody, welcome back to the 7th episode of the Surfside Recovery Podcast. My name is Brian, alongside Mr. Ian Koch. I just want to thank everyone so far for, watching our videos, sharing them. I've got a lot of good feedback. My buddy Rob, my buddy Mike actually told me yesterday that they enjoyed the podcast we did on marijuana legalization.
I actually got a bunch of feedback from the Step 2 coping skills one.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Positive feedback, I hope?
Yeah, very.
Yeah, so that's good. I mean, it solidifies that the time we're spending doing this, and it does take a long time, at least to edit and stuff like that, that people are getting something out of it. And if you haven't done so yet, we're on the Apple Podcast app. For some reason, we're still not on Spotify. I don't know what the deal is with that.
Who even uses Spotify anymore? Is that a thing?
I use Spotify to listen to music only because with my student email, I got Spotify and Hulu, and it's $4.99 a month.
That's not bad.
Yeah, so I don't even have cable, but I had to, if I bought Spotify at $4.99, then Hulu was included at the same price. Really, it's more for people who are Android users that don't have the Apple Podcast app. But if you're an Android user, you can use the app called Stitcher, and that's where our podcasts are for Android users.
I feel bad for Android users.
I tell you what, man, I used an Android I had an iPhone 4 and then went Android until the iPhone X came out. And there's some things I don't like about the iPhone, one of which is on my Android, if I wanted to type, like say I was calling your name, I could press 4, 2, 6, like start texting your name, and then it would pop up and I could call you. And you can't do that on an iPhone. You have to search the name in your contacts.
Or you could just ask Siri to do it for you.
Yeah, I don't like that for some reason. It never really works right.
Oh.
Yeah, I never really use voice commands. But we digress.
We do digress. I also, for the folks who have trouble hearing me, I apologize. We are looking into something to try to figure out how to get my voice a bit clearer.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know if it's that I have a low voice or if I think really Brian just gives me the bad microphone and so everybody can hear him clearly and can't hear me. So if you're driving in the car, I've got some feedback from my buddy Mike D. And he said, it's great, except I can't hear you, and I had to listen to it as loud as possible. So we do know that that's a problem, and we're trying to get all that squared away. So hang tight, and we will ideally figure it out.
Right. Currently, I'm turning up the levels on your microphone so that you sound louder.
Awesome. And if you are watching this versus listening, you notice we've changed scenery today. We are coming at you live from a jungle. A jungle of houseplants. So wanted to get out of the office and try something different. So
I enjoy the space. Very much so.
I'm uncomfortable. I like my chair better.
Yeah,
but I like the space better, I think, for this.
It just feels a little more open.
Hopefully it's aesthetically pleasing.
I think so. Yes, it's very warm.
That's what's important.
And fuzzy. So the topic today that we are going to talk about is kind of starting from the bottom. You could probably take this in a bunch of different directions, whether you're in recovery or out of recovery, but I guess it's more the value of hard work. Would you say so?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think human beings are inherently lazy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look, I want things given to me. That's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
However, my experience shows me that the harder I work, the better I feel about things.
Right. This kind of goes back to the one podcast we were talking about with gratitude that, when I buy something for myself or take my apartment, for example, or anything like that. All right, here's the best way to explain this, right? So in my apartment, right, I pay the electric bill, obviously with the assistance of my roommate, every month. And when I do that, I make sure all the lights are shut off, right? Now, having been a resident and also someone who's worked for you as a house manager, one thing I consistently notice is that people don't ever turn the lights off. And while it might not seem like a big deal to them, it's probably because they're not working towards paying for the bill to go down.
Or they don't understand it, or they've never had to have that experience in the past. So why would you, you don't know what you don't know, right? I remember when checkbooks were still popular, and I had my first checking account. My father used to tell me that I always had to balance my checkbook, and I thought that was stupid. So he would say, balance your checkbook or you're going to have an overdraft. And I would often have overdrafts. And I want to say they were $37. Maybe they were $17. Maybe they were $7. I don't know. I was in high school. I know there was a 7 in the number.
Right.
And like the first one he took care of, the second one he took care of, the third one I had to take care of, or something like that. But eventually it was like $37. Eventually I got the hint and I figured it out. Like, whoa, I actually should pay attention to this.
Right.
And I think that in a lot of circumstances, it's almost, and I hate to use the term millennial generation. I found out that I actually am in that generation, even though I'm 37.
Yeah, what is it, like 81, 82 or something?
Yeah,
to like
it's like
98?
On the cusp of 81, 82 to 98. But it's not even that. It's that the younger generation like wants to get out of high school or even get out of college and be the CEO. And the reality of it is a lot of people don't have the skills to do that. Like I've said to you multiple times that, my education and training is in therapy, it's in intervention styles, it's in helping people, right? Like helping people recover, helping people wake up to the reality or the severity of their situation. It's not in being an executive director. So I've like stumbled into this position that I have literally no training for.
Right.
I don't have a business background. I think a lot of initially getting Surfside off the ground was rubbing pennies together, making nickels, a lot of hard work and a lot of prayer. But you see it all the time. You see people who have a skill. And luckily, like I had some experience from some other businesses that I was a part of or built and got rid of and sold or whatever, my kiteboarding business and things. But I think a lot of people like they want to make all the money, but they don't realize like when you're making a lot of money, you have a lot of responsibility. And it's like little things like if you can't remember to turn the lights off, how are you going to operate a company?
Right.
How are you going to be in that big position?
Yeah, it's a lot.
That's worth the pay.
Right. It's definitely a lot of stress. I know I'm kind of in business with a good friend of mine, and it's the same thing. Like there's the more projects and more work we have, the more goes into it. The more emails you have, the more accounting things you need to do. And there's just like, even now, like I have a couple of video projects I'm working on with you, and now they're growing and a couple of them aren't closing. And it's like, all right, now instead of juggling 1 or 2 projects, now I got 6. So after we record a couple of podcasts, it goes from, I had 1 or 2 on my plate to now 6 of them. So,
and it's a huge ordeal.
It's a huge ordeal. And the key for me is to just be organized with what I have.
Sure.
I have a pretty janky organization system, but it's an organization system that works in my head. What I do is I have pieces aligned, notebook paper, and I kind of separate it. The first 3 quarters is for stuff I do at Surfside, and the bottom 3 quarters is what I do for my personal business. And then I kind of have like a triage system of like, these are the things, at the top of the list is the most important. And as it goes down, it gets less important or less time sensitive, whatever way you want to call it.
Sure.
And then I cross them off and then like move them over, and stuff that doesn't need to get done that day is on the right-hand side of the column. And then the next day I carry it over and they fill in. Yeah.
It's the story of my life. And I think that, so when we're talking, especially about folks in recovery, I know we're getting a lot of, it seems like the majority of the people listening to our podcast are in the like 18 to 35 age. So I'm assuming a lot of you who are listening are in early recovery, and look, like I was there. But I mean, think about it, like look around your surroundings. Like if you can't make your bed, if you can't turn the lights off, if you struggle to do dishes, like why in the world would you think you'd be worth $20 an hour?
Wow.
I mean, I'm not trying to be an asshole, but I
Yeah.
mean, really think about that. Like if you legitimately can't remember to turn lights off,
Mhm.
how are you going to do this thing? And a lot of people are like, oh, well, that's a bad example, but it's not actually a bad example. It's a skill. Can you remember to do something? Period.
Mhm.
Like it's just that simple. Can you remember to do something? You know, my first job in addiction is like the worst field because people like we're supposed to like help people live, yet we don't get paid anything. The hours typically suck. It's a tough field. It's high stress, high burnout. You know, it's an ordeal.
Mhm.
And you know, my first mental health job, I don't even want to go into that. It was really bad. Second one was kind of bad. Third one was like the first like decent one, and that was in addiction.
Mhm.
And I was getting paid $10.70 an hour. I was working third shift at a detox, so it was 11
to 7, right?
11 to
That's the third
7.
shift.
The job was almost 50 minutes away from my house.
Right.
So
This is when you were living up in Vermont, right?
in Burlington, it was
Okay.
called Act One. It was a detox. Some of you who are listening to this have been there. I know that. You know, but like, dude, I would drive from Montpelier, Vermont up to Burlington. I had a job in Montpelier. That was horrible.
Mhm.
And it was like less money and it was a day job, but it was really, really bad. So I got this job at this detox. I was like, all right, finally, I was moving from like mental health into addiction. At that point in time, you had to have 2 years sober to get into the addiction field.
Right.
Everyone was like really, really adamant about that. So I would drive like 45, 50 minutes. I would go to an evening 12-step meeting. Then I would go to, I would hang out. Then I would go to work at 11. I would get out at 7, and then I would have like an hour drive home,
Mhm.
which was horrible.
Right.
For $10.70 an hour. You know what I mean? And I mean, it was bad news. Like it was rough. And little by slow, like I got educated. I started to do certain things, you know, slowly move my way up, you know, little by slow, little by slow, little by slow. And what a lot of people don't realize is that when I started Surfside, I mean, I still, you know, like I work on a good week, I work 60 hours.
Mhm.
It's a good week, partly because I like to work a lot, but there's stuff that needs to be done.
Mhm.
There's always a phone call that needs to be returned. There's always an email that needs to be returned. There's always some sort of data to review, budget to pay attention to. I mean, this weekend I'm like running errands. I was at Home Depot at,
Right.
what time did I call you this morning?
Probably like 8 something.
And I was leaving Home Depot
Right. Yeah.
at that point.
Yeah, I know when I used to work in the golf course business on the maintenance side, that type of industry, and it really seems like as the older I get and know a little bit more about different industries, they're all sort of one and the same. At a golf course, you have 200 acres of property that needs to get manicured. And you can never really say you're done because there's always something else that can be done. There's always a weed growing. There's always some mulch bed that doesn't look as good as it should. So you can have, 60, 70, 80% of the course like where you want it, but there's always something that can improve. And that kind of philosophy that there's always something that can be improved, always something that can be worked on or made better or optimized or whatever word you want to use for it is the kind of attitude I try to take in my life now.
Yeah.
So there's always something better that can be done. I could always save a little bit more money. I could always spend more time doing this or more time doing that.
I think it's also really important to understand. So like for a long time, I always thought that I wasn't getting paid enough.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought that was the problem. The problem wasn't that I wasn't getting paid enough. It's that I didn't know how to manage my money. Right.
Yeah.
Like, and I did what a lot of newcomers do. I would buy dumb shit to impress people I didn't like. Seriously, like all the time.
Right.
Or I would eat out all the time.
That was one of my New Year's resolutions, was to eat out less. So actually I made a really good pulled pork yesterday. I made some of the best nachos I've ever ate in my entire life. they're phenomenal. I finally mastered like refried beans. But
Okay.
anyway, yeah, eating out is a huge expense, and it's tough, especially when you live alone. That when you buy food, you feel like you're wasting a lot of it because
If you don't cook it, yeah.
well, if you don't cook it and then being able to eat it before it goes bad. Like I don't have a really big appetite. Like I usually don't eat until about like 11 or 12 o'clock. And then I'll eat again at like 6 or 7 and then maybe a snack right before I go to sleep. So like I'm just not intaking that much food as a whole. So I tend to waste a lot of food. That's
You gotta be careful, yeah.
I got to be careful. So that's when what I started doing was just inviting people over to my place to eat, to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Which is also.
And this is all this like there's something to be said for working hard, right? And to start at the bottom is really the only way to get to the top.
Right.
You know, right. Step 1, to get to step 12, you need to get this through step 1. You know, somebody last night was really worried about step 3, but they don't have a sponsor. They don't know anything about step 1.
Right.
And I think that's
so hard to comprehend when you're the person in that position. Like
I know.
For us, it's really easy to say, but it's so hard having been on the other side. And I know you have too. It's almost impossible to like grasp that. Like you have a problem with step 3, but your one and 2 is non-existent. But it's hard when you're in those shoes to be able to get a grasp.
Yeah. Like, I mean, and again, like I want, just like everybody, like I think it's natural to want to make a lot of money and be at the top right away, especially if you're an alcoholic or a drug addict. I mean, our literature is very clear. It talks about being the actor wanting to run the show, right? Forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, and the scenery and the rest of the players in our own way.
Right.
And that's like, I always think I can do a better job than my boss. I always think my boss doesn't know what he's talking about. I always think that I can do a better job than them. But the reality of it is they've earned that position. So if I want to do that, I need to earn that position, right? Like I need to work my way up, or however that looks, to get into a position to do so.
Yeah, and there's probably a little bit of good in thinking that too. Also, that if you think you could do a better job than somebody else, as long as it's used appropriately. You know, something I talk to about my sponsor, we speak about all the time, is that I can have all these, you know, character defects or something, but if used properly, they're actually assets.
They could be, yeah.
Of course. But obviously it needs to be used in the appropriate manner.
And it's also like a prove it thing. You know, so as an employer, and hopefully all my employees listen to this, as an employer, like if you want a raise or something, like don't just say like, hey, I think I'd like a raise. Like, sure, we'd all like a raise.
Right.
I get it. Why are you worth a raise? Right. Like how are you adding value? And for all of you who are like looking for work, who want to whatever, do better stuff, check out Gary V on everything, all social media. Find him. He really, I listen to him quite a bit. You know that. And he really has a lot, like his experience is very similar to mine. You know, like my parents, like my first job, I was 14 years old. I had to have a job in the summer. By the time, as soon as I could get working papers, I had a job. I always had chores and I got an allowance if I did my chores. Like, so I was taught really early on that you're not going to get something if you
don't work for it.
Yeah. And I don't come from money. I mean, my mom drove a school bus and my dad worked at a wastewater treatment plant, like very, very basic, lower middle class, $70,000 a year. My parents were phenomenal. My father is excellent with money.
Yeah, they also grew up in a little bit of a different
generation.
Yeah, I mean, a different economic area too. You know, trying to support a family like it was just you, right? You're a single kid.
Just me, yeah.
So my parents were on a similar economic class, had another child, and the money that they made then wouldn't suffice raising children today.
Sure,
but continue.
Sure,
Sorry,
but regardless, right? Like I was taught to work.
Right.
And then in high school, I started landscaping, but I also had a side hustle where I would do like I worked for a landscape company, but I also had a couple of my own side gigs, some of my neighbors that I would do some landscaping for as well.
Right.
Now, mind you, I pissed all that money away on weed and alcohol, but right, I knew that like if I wanted something, like I had to go work for it, and I had to prove it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I've left jobs. I was at a local treatment center, and you know they kept telling me that I was a counselor. And they kept telling me that they were going to promote me, and they would every once in a while, like every 6 months, they would talk to me about this position that they really wanted me to do, but none of it would ever like come together.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, after 3 years of that, I was like, enough is enough, and that's when I left and then started Surfside.
What do you think the reason was that it didn't come to fruition? Bad middle management or upper management or something like that?
I mean, 6 months after I left, they finally hired someone for the position.
Right. They were just dragging their feet.
I think so. You know,
it's also a managing technique too.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of factors. You know, one of the factors over there was that, like, I also, you know, some of the things that I did, I was able to push for it, and I was able to get some of the things I wanted. Like I wanted a specific schedule. They initially said no. I proved to them over and over and over that I should have that schedule. And finally, like, they were like, all right, you're right.
You got it.
You know, and it wasn't necessarily a raise, but it was a better schedule.
Mm-hmm. Which is sometimes just as nice.
In my circumstances, it was 6 to 2. So I got out at 2 every day. And then
the shift I work is fantastic.
I could go kite surf, you know.
Right.
I could go do what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. But again, like I proved it, you know, like I showed up every day, day after day after day after day, pushing, advocating for myself, and not just saying like, I want this because I think it's a good idea.
Right.
Right. Being able to say like, I want this. This is why it's a good idea. And I've been able to prove over and over and over that I can make this thing work.
Right.
You know, again, putting in the hard work first. And then getting, you know what I mean, getting the check or whatever, the bonus at the end, whatever it may be.
Or the good schedule, is that what you mean?
Good schedule, okay. Whatever that thing is at the end.
You lost me for a second. Yeah, I mean, the first source of income I ever had was cutting lawns in my neighborhood too. And I think I was 11, 12, something like that. I wanted an iPod. So what I did was I passed out a whole bunch of flyers to literally everyone in my neighborhood. And there's probably 600 houses. And on the flyer it said, first free estimate, first cut free. So within the
that's a lot of free lawn care potentially.
Potentially, yeah. But I mean, I cut probably 25 lawns for free and then kept about half of them on. And when I was 12, every 2 weeks, and they were all like, a lot of them were townhouses. So the time invested into doing it, I was making $20 to cut somebody's front yard at a townhouse. And it would only take me about 15 or 20 minutes. So I was making like $1 a minute.
It's great.
At 12 years old.
It's fantastic.
So I bought my first car that way.
Yeah.
And then when I could be on the books,
forget that. You're like, I want to do this so I can get an iPod, and you end up getting a car.
Well, I got the iPod. Actually, what happened was after I saved up all the money that I needed for the iPod, and I had like a little tally on my closet, my dad actually bought one for me and told me to put the money in the bank and then save up for when I needed a car. And then I just kept building and building and building. And then eventually started smoking weed, and it
dwindled.
Drugs and whatever. But yeah, I mean, you have to start somewhere. I think it's also important to have like a clear vision of what you want and then work backwards from whatever it is. Like if you want to be the boss of something, you got to start with the end goal and then figure out all the middle ground in between.
And sometimes it's like a hard lesson to learn. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like to finally get to that position. But you know, I mean, we deal with that at Surfside all the time. You know, like guys don't want to walk to a job, or they think that they're, you know, now that they're like 5 months sober, their parents should buy them a car, which is like,
take the bus.
Yeah, dude, walk, ride a bike. I mean, and you know, like I'm the worst to talk to about it. I mean, for those who don't know, I got sober in Burlington, Vermont, and did 2 full winters up there riding on the bus or taking a bike with no driver's license, because I didn't have a driver's license the first year and a half of my sobriety. And you know, in Ventnor, everything's flat. You know what I mean?
Yeah, everything's flat.
Everything's flat, and we don't even get snow.
Right. Yeah, the bus is pretty easy. It's annoying to take the bus, but
sure,
it can be done.
But it's one thing to wait for the bus and take an hour bus ride when the bus is literally across the street.
Right.
Versus standing in the cold in 0 degrees in Burlington, Vermont, for a bus that doesn't come that often or is bad roads, so is often late.
Right. Yeah,
you know, it's like a whole nother story.
I took it when I lived down in DC, and it was whatever.
Yeah, it is what it is. But
you're always happier when you get the car.
Yeah, but then you you get the car, and it's like, you know, especially if you save up for it and you earn it. I mean, that becomes a big deal,
right?
You know, versus just like constantly saying like, "Can I have this? Can I have this? Can I have this?" You know.
Yeah, you don't really value anything when it's just handed to you. I think that's uniform across the board with anything. You know, you don't take care of the stuff that you didn't. I know for me, if I don't pay for something, I don't take care of it as if it was my own.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that about sums it up on the, I guess, starting at the bottom, or you know, the correlation between gratitude for the stuff you have and the amount of effort you put into it. You really put into what you get.
Yeah.
And I also think that the view from the top isn't always as glamorous as people think it might be.
No. No, because nobody wants to work that much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't.
I mean, that's the reality.
Yeah, it's much easier sitting at home, getting some direction on how to do something, doing it, and then come 3:00, turning the computer off and doing whatever I want to do.
I mean, the people at the top, or what a lot of people don't realize is the people at the top have all the responsibility.
Right.
So if there's any kink in the armor, it always is the guy at the top's responsibility.
Right. Even
down to like, if I have an employee that does a bad job, it's my fault because I hired them.
Right.
So it's always my responsibility, you know?
Right. Can't blame anybody else but you.
No.
There it is, taking responsibility for it all.
It's
right
the
there,
truth.
live
I mean, it's
tape.
the truth. Every single thing, every resident, every family member, every employee, like every little thing is my responsibility at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah.
You started it.
I mean, look, I like it, kind of. I do threaten to quit sometimes, but you know, what are you going to do? All
right, so Ian's quitting, and we're going to end the podcast on that note. Be sure to check out...
Brian's the new executive director.
No, Dan is.
Dan has already denied the job.
If I just lost my train of thought. If
you have questions or comments or concerns,
there you go.
Please email.
What he said.
Email structuredsoberliving@gmail.com. Respond to some of the stuff. Post a comment. Post a question. Send a, what do they say? Slide in our DM.
Yeah, slide in our. Slide in Ian's
the
DM.
young kids say slide in our DM.
Yeah. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'll have a nice little graphic right about here that'll tell you what our handles are. And yeah, like you said, you got any questions or anything, give us a ring. Thanks for watching.
Cowabunga.